Welcome back to Fourth and Troll Fantasy. 7 players to write down for 2025. Do not forget about these guys when it comes to draft season. Could be a low ADP. We're looking at value here. All of these guys, we believe, probably should be getting drafted higher than where we're predicting their ADP to be in 2025. Almost like an early reachers segment right here, but guys that you need to be keeping in mind. Write these guys down, bookmark this episode, and we will definitely have some good stuff for you as we continue into the offseason as well. But it will not be the last time you guys hear of these names. Wes, you go first, and we'll ping-pong it back and forth a little bit.
All right, these are our players, 7 players to write down for 2025. And like Noah said, these are particularly, most of them are reachers, players that you're not exactly going to take in that first round. Here's the first one I think you got to write down. You got to write down the name Drake Maye. Rookie quarterback for 2024, second year in 2025. Drake Maye had a lot of very impressive finishes, especially with what felt like a very hollow offense in New England. First ever game as a starter was the QB 10. And then his second game was a QB 7. We said, go get him. He ended up being one of the safest floor options among all quarterbacks, pretty much at that QB 15 mark week to week. This next season, we're going to see a really good improvement from the guy that's going to have the starting job from week 1. I know his playoff finishes in fantasy weren't all that impressive, but that being said, you know how rookie quarterbacks do. When they have a pretty decent season, they do really well the next year. He's got all this under his belt. I expect great things from a guy that has some pretty good rushing upside as well, especially with whatever the Patriots do in the upcoming NFL draft. Drake Maye, I can see being a legitimate top 15 quarterback. Very, very low predicted ADP. Write down the name Drake Maye to draft in 2025.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's going to be a great one. My first guy you need to write down, the first guy in my eyes that you have to write down to remember for 2025, it's another quarterback. It's Bryce Young. I know we thought Bryce Young was thrown in the trash. Okay, we thought he was done for. We called it what it was. We had inklings of him being a bust in his rookie year that we talked about, and then he got benched for Andy Dalton. And we looked at it as, oh boy, this guy's toast. This guy's done. There's what the end of a career was before it even got started. Bryce Young was the QB 9 from week 11 on throughout the rest of the season for fantasy football. What did we say coming into this season about Dave Canales? We saw what he did for Geno. We saw what he did for Baker. I've got a feeling he's going to be able to do something here with Bryce Young in year 3, another year in the system, and he's going to get a full year with him. Bryce was playing really well. It was exciting to see. He was moving the offense. He was doing something with this Panthers offense that we didn't see him do for the previous many, many games that he played in his rookie year. Lots of good things to come for Bryce Young, I believe. I think they'll take the offseason, they'll look at things, they'll go, what do we need to do to equip him best to succeed? And I think he'll be able to do it. I think it'll be really solid. And I think he's going to be a name that a lot of people are talking about mid-year next year. We're talking about him right now. We want to put him on the radar right now as a guy that you need to write down and be thinking about. So he's my first guy you should be writing down, yeah.
I wrote him down too. Noah took him from me because we're both in agreement. Bryce Young is someone that I'm actually going to try to target as my QB2 in the draft next year. Probably not my starter, but I'm writing him down, man. I'm really excited about what he's doing in Carolina.
Yeah.
The second player for me, third guy you got to write down for 2025 in fantasy next year is going to go with my quarterback. You got to write down the name Demario Douglas. We had a lot of interesting games from him. We saw a lot of good opportunities between Jacoby Brissett and Drake Maye. He had some flashes and some good plays, but couldn't quite get the ball rolling because the offense was just struggling a lot and they couldn't really figure out exactly their identity. When you start with Drake Maye next season, they're going to know from the beginning of training camp and OTAs who their stars are, and that's going to be Demario Douglas. He still finished as the head and shoulders best wide receiver for New England. He had twice as many receptions as the next wide receiver, 63. The next one was Kayshon Boutte with 36. Very, very big difference there. There's no competition for wide receivers. Had the most receiving touchdowns on the team. He had the most targets by far. He is a very impressive guy. We both like him a lot. Demario Douglas, with his third-year leap that I expect from him, and Drake May's second-year leap, I really like the opportunity to get Demario Douglas late in next season's draft and have a potential solid wide receiver two in my team. Write down the name Demario Douglas for next season.
Absolutely, yeah. The next guy you got to write down here, it's a name that is a little more popular than these first three guys that we talked about here, but I don't think people are talking about him enough yet. And so we want to get ahead of this. It's Brian Thomas Jr., rookie wide receiver for the Jacksonville Jaguars, a.k.a. the PPR wide receiver 4 on the season. Just absolute fumble on my end. I believed I was selling high on both Brian Thomas Jr. and Jackson Smith and Jigba. around the time that JSN had the 37-point game or whatever it was. And I sold. I believed in what I had. I got George Pickens and Cortland Sutton in return. I believed I was winning that side of the deal. It wasn't bad until George Pickens got hurt, but I mean, it was. I would have won the championship in this league had I not done that. Wow. I would have. I threw away my season because of it, and so it was rough. But Brian Thomas Jr., a guy that we have to continue to talk about and remember throughout the offseason. Here's the thing. I believe he'll get his flowers, and I believe it'll be not. He won't just be thrown aside. But he could be going the third or fourth round just because of some of the names that are around and some of the names and the name value of players. And I think he should be going at the top of the second round next year. I think he should be a wide receiver 1 on your team. I believe that's the value he'll have. He'll end up being in my top 10 wide receivers when we come down to it going into 2025 when we put out those lists. And so I really believe Brian Thomas Jr. is a name that we just have to continue. You can't let the sophomore idea of whatever the second year dip could mean or anything like that. I really believe Brian Thomas Jr. is a guy that we need to continue to remember as we go into 2025.
Yeah, wide receiver 4. Unbelievable.
Crazy.
Fifth player to write down for 2025. Someone that we saw a lot of good games from for just a moment, and then he missed the rest of the entire year with a concussion. Write down the name Cedric Tillman. Don't forget what he did in that little stretch when Jameis Winston was finally the starter for the Cleveland Browns. Look what Jerry Jeudy did. He was a top 15 wide receiver in full PPR because Tillman was out. I'm not saying Jerry Jeudy can't be great next season, but don't forget about Cedric Tillman. What he was doing with that Browns offense is awesome. And now, obviously, there are a lot of quarterback confusion questions going into the Cleveland Browns season for 2025. But Cedric Tillman's a guy that can be a really solid wide receiver 3 with wide receiver 2 upside that you should try to target next year. He's really, really good. Don't forget that guy. Write down his name, Cedric Tillman, someone you got to try to target for 2025.
Yeah, we all thought. I mean, it was what could have been. It was Cedric Tillman, and then I hope the guy's okay. Like if he, and this will probably even help even more. It'll help even more for his ADP probably. And I mean, I don't want to be a terrible human and be like, well, fantasy football when the guy's like right. fighting for his life and his well-being. But I mean, yeah, definitely a name to keep remembering there and write down. Last guy for me. You need to write this guy's name down. You need to remember him. It's Xavier Worthy. I can't describe to you guys how good he actually was enough. I can't describe enough because over the second half of the season, he was on a 134 target pace for the year. He exploded in his usage over the second half of the year. His final 7 games, 134 target pace. And the Rashee Rice suspension is still looming, you guys. We didn't get it this season, not to mention the ACL injury. So we're looking at things and we're going, okay, at what point is Rashee Rice back? Worthy is set up, at least for the first half of the season, to establish himself as a very, very solid fantasy football wide receiver for your teams. And people don't realize how good he has been. He was an absolute stud, especially for the fantasy playoffs. right around that 20-point mark every single week. He was being a major contributor to your team. 9 targets, 11 targets, 11 targets. His usage was beautiful to see. It seems like Andy Reid found maybe a little bit of a player that he can do some things with. So he is my final guy you need to write down for 2025.
Here's my final guy, the 7th player to write down going into 2025 for fantasy football. Write down the name Taysom Hill. Don't forget how important he is to that Saints team, especially with what the quarterback situation looks like. Are they going to keep Derek Carr? Are they going to roll with Spencer Rattler? Who knows? Is Alvin Kamara going to be healthy enough to do well? What are the other wide receivers going to look like? Oh my gosh, there's so much that's confusing for that Saints offense, except for Taysom Hill, who plays quarterback, tight end, running back, wide receiver, punter, head coach, and GM. This guy is a part of the whole Saints organization. We saw that incredible game. Don't think that was a fluke. Yes, he's going to be a little bit of a tricky guy to navigate, but when you have someone with a 50-point ceiling who has no one else that's really competing for the ball in that Saints offense, I like Taysom Hill. Write down that guy's name. He might be a really good option for you in 2025.
There it is. Make sure you have those 7 names written down. They're going to be key as we go into the 2025 season. Get a head start by getting them into your head, into your brain right now, as you're gearing up, as we're closing out the 2024 season.